Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today as we discuss preparing for IDDSI enforcement, survey readiness, and implementation strategies. Today, we are thrilled to welcome our special guest, IDDSI compliance champions Luis Riquelme and Noel Slaughter. With their deep expertise in IDDSI, today they'll be sharing actionable strategies for smooth implementation and survey-ready compliance. Our goal here today is to help you feel confident navigating change so your team can stay focused on delivering safe and quality service. Before we get into today's topic, I would like to introduce our experts. Dr. Riquelme is the current co-chair of IDDSI Global. He works as a consulting director in rehabilitation speech-language pathologies at Maimonides Health in Brooklyn, New York, and is the associate professor and director of postgraduate certificate program in deglutition and dysphagia at the Universidad Católica de Uruguay in Montevideo, Uruguay. His current research focuses on swallowing physiology in dementia and pill swallowing. He has also had publications about the relationship between culture and dysphagia. Luis has presented locally and internationally. He serves as a member of the ASHA Health Economic Committee. He received the honors of ASHA and the honors of NISHLA in 2024. Distinguished Alumni Award from Teachers College at Columbia University in 2023, and is a fellow member of the American Speech Language Hearing Association. We are very grateful for Luis joining us today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Noel is the Senior Manager of Nutrition Services at MealSuite, leading a team to create safe, delicious, and diet-appropriate menus, including IDDSI-compliant options. With experience as a clinical dietitian and food service director in hospital and long-term care, she brings expertise and real-world insight into her role. Serving as the chair of IDDSI Global Long-Term Care Reference Group and a member of the IDDSI US Reference Group, Noel is passionate about making nutritious food exciting for every dietary need. Welcome, Noel.
Thank you, Victoria.
Before we dive in, if you have any questions for Noel or Luis throughout the webinar, please pop them into the chat and we'll save 15 minutes at the end to answer them for you. Any questions that are not able to get to, we will send them in a follow-up email. Now let's get to the topic for today. To start us off, Luis, can you briefly walk us through the history of IDDSI and how and why it was created?
Yes, for sure. IDDSI, the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative, started by a couple of crazy colleagues back in around 2011, 2012, who had some concerns over how we were describing diets and the textures and just locally noticing how we weren't really using the same language. What some of us called chopped wasn't chopped in another place. What some of us called, mechanically altered was different, etc. And so, and we had a few colleagues from different countries, right? So the group came together. The initial group represented colleagues from Canada, the United States, Australia, South Africa, Japan, China, Spain. I might be missing one or two countries, but they came together and they said, okay, so how do we resolve this? And if you look in the IDDSI website, IDDSI.org, you'll see that we have several initial papers that were published afterwards, 2014, 2015, first doing a survey, a global survey that was completed not only by professionals that practice in the area of dysphagia, but also caregivers and persons with swallowing problems. And we received surveys from 33 different countries, over 3,000 responses. And so that led us to understand that, or the group at that time, I wasn't on the board of directors at the time, but led the group to understand that we had way too many labels, 54 different labels for different food consistencies, and 23 different labels for liquids. And but each country really used 2 or 3 for liquids and 3 or 4 for foods. So how can we reach some kind of consensus? The other then next step was to figure out, does the physiology of the swallow really change based on the consistency? And so then that was a systematic review to see what we knew thus far. And that's how the group then came to the conclusion that we really needed something more homogeneous, something we could really share and relate to. And that's then when the first IDDSI framework was published and presented to the world, and then later revised in 2019. That is basically the history of how this all started. And today we remain a board of directors. I was asked to join back in 2016. That is completely voluntary, so we don't get paid for what we're doing. This is all on a volunteer basis.
Wow, thank you very much for setting the stage for us, giving us some brief history there.
Sure.
Noel, when did IDDSI become the best practice in clinical care, and what does that mean for other texture modified frameworks?
Yeah, so as Louise explained, IDDSI's been around for a bit. In the early, 2011, it wasn't really pushed out, the framework, until about, I think, 2015-ish, pushing out for adoption. And adoption really varied across the globe. As we mentioned, this is a global initiative, so it looks a little different in all different countries. But it started to become more formally adopted in the early 2020s. And that was mainly because there was a lot of growing evidence that did show that this IDDSI framework was reducing errors and confusion for other frameworks and helping patients with their outcomes. So that did kind of push more formal adoption of this. So it wasn't until October 2021 in the United States, IDDSI did become the only texture modified diet framework that was recognized by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is the professional organization for registered dietitians, and then the American Speech Language Hearing Association, which is the professional organization for speech language pathologists. So both of those organizations came out stating that IDDSI was the best practice for texture modified framework. So it was that at that time then that the national dysphagia diet was considered to be obsolete, October 2021. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that the national dysphagia diet was wrong per se, but it's just no longer aligned with the research and the evidence. It was the best that we knew at that time, but evidence has evolved. We know more now, and the standards have evolved with what we have learned, and IDDSI supports that. So continuing to use an outdated framework is becoming harder to justify given all of the evidence supporting that this is the best practice.
And Noel, that's a really great overview. And the truth is that every country, as you said, kind of manages IDDSI differently, right? So in our country and in like Australia, for example, it's the professional associations that support IDDSI and kind of set the standard. Whereas in other countries like Israel, New Zealand, and others, the Ministry of Health actually, so at the Department of Health level, have said, no, IDDSI is what we're going to follow by a certain date. Oh, in Canada, by the way. Ever since like 2019, we've been seeing that in several countries. But I also wanted to mention that, and people often forget, with the with the NDD, the National Dysphagia Diet, even in their introduction, they acknowledge, this is like sort of a beginning place, and it is very probable that this will evolve into something else, or this will not be the standard all the time. So I think some people are married to the NDD and don't want to acknowledge some of the, I don't want to say limitations, but the shortcomings of what was developed back then. And you said it beautifully. It was what we had back then, what was available. And so now we've moved forward.
Absolutely.
So now that we know that IDDSI is best practice, I would like to discuss what you have seen or heard in facilities around regulations and enforcement from surveyors when it comes to IDDSI. So Luis, can you explain how IDDSI is starting to be enforced across several states, and what does that look like?
So it's a very interesting process. It's exciting, it's scary, all at the same time. Because again, and I'll tell you, I would love it if in one day in the United States, the Joint Commission that accredits, hospitals, et cetera, would say, listen, this is the standard, right? But they will not be doing that anytime soon because they don't really prescribe, right? Um, but what's happening, and we're seeing this in several states, we're seeing it in California, we're seeing it in Wisconsin, is that departments of health at the state level are looking at, and what we're hearing about mostly is um, not only what is the testing being done in the kitchen, but also what happens at the point of service. Right. So just like I know, I practiced most of my life in New York. And so I know that when people think about point of service, immediately they think about temperature of the food, right? So the big thing is how do you keep the food warm from the kitchen to the bedside? Or to the dining room, right? In the case of long-term care, for example. And so now some of the surveyors or auditors are actually saying, okay, are you testing at the point of service to make sure that that texture modified food remains at that texture? I will tell you, we had the opportunity at the US IDDSI symposium back in July in Los Angeles. We actually had as invited speakers some of the surveyors. And there's a lot of gossip out there saying, oh, this place was dinged because they, didn't meet the standard. Okay, that's not true. Okay, no place is losing accreditation or getting citations from the Department of Health because of that. However, auditors are expecting that facilities are doing their point of service testing and have a process for that, right? But they are writing that as recommendations. They are not stating that as, oh, this is a red flag, this is horrible, right? They're actually happy that more and more facilities are implementing IDDSI and using the standard.
From your perspective, why are surveyors citing facilities for not using IDDSI?
Right. So first of all, why aren't they using IDDSI, right? If 20 years ago, I mean, there are facilities, tons of facilities not using the NDD either, right? So they're still talking about chopped and mechanical soft, et cetera. And those we've known for ages don't go from one facility to another facility, right? And especially if we're talking about facilities that have licensed clinicians, right? So the registered dietitians and the speech pathologists that are there, why aren't they talking to the rest of the team, the kitchen team, the executive chef about, listen, here's the standard. This is what we should be offering our patients, right? So two things I want to mention here. One is this shouldn't be a fearful process, this whole point of service testing. It can be set up as an ongoing performance improvement project, right? So now you've got a good performance improvement project, and you've also got then compliance with, let's say, a state auditor if they come in, right? So that they can see that you are managing and looking at that. And that if maybe they go ahead and they do testing, right there on the spot as part of their audit, and it doesn't meet, the criteria for that item, you still have data saying, but look, we regularly check 10% or 20%, whatever you and the leadership decide to do. And so then that also lets the auditor know that you are following this, this process. And we also have to start looking at the reality of, there's still a high rate of choking deaths in this country, right? And in other parts of the country. And so whenever you look at some of these cases, you wonder, was IDDSI implemented at that facility? Or once again, that somebody that was, let's say, on a mechanically soft diet, get a tuna fish sandwich, right? And wasn't being supervised and choked and died. So really, really important to think about that, right? And it's a constant process. It's not, remember, this is a framework. It is not a diet, right? So the kitchen and the team will bring in new items, right? Maybe we've never, I don't know, I'm making this up. Noel probably has better examples, but we've never served broccoli at our facility. Now we're bringing it in and we have to figure out how to modify it to level 5 and to level 6 and so on. It's all doable, right? But especially if you work as a team, and maybe that's 6 months after you rolled out IDDSI, you add new items to the menu, which is good, and the patients will hopefully benefit from that.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you for
agree
that.
with that. And I think too, like, because it's been since 2021 now that this has been considered best practice, I think there's been a time period in which people should now be familiar with this. So these conversations should definitely be happening at the facilities by this time.
Yeah. You know what's interesting, Noel, is so actually it was in the middle of 2019 that both A&D and ASHA wrote the statement of support for IDDSI. But it wasn't until A&D completed the process of updating the diet manual, right? And so that's why you keep saying 2021, because that's really when the world paid attention. Oh, it's in the diet manual.
Right.
And so now it really meant something, which was an interesting process to see happen now in retrospect.
Noel, can you explain how IDDSI aligns with federal standards around resident safety and care, and what specific regulations or guidelines will surveyors be referencing when they are issuing a citation related to IDDSI?
Yeah, so we've been talking about IDDSI as the best practice. So what does that mean, really? Best practice means that it's the most standardized and widely accepted approach to care based on the available evidence that we have. So best practice doesn't always equal regulation or the law. It's not necessarily apples for apples like that, but best practice does shape expectations for the quality of care that you're providing to your residents, and professional accountability, and survey scrutiny, so that you understand what surveyors are going to be looking for in your facility. So many federal regulations in the US will refer to a standard of practice. And like Luis mentioned, different countries handle this in different ways. And some governments or ministries of health will specifically regulate it by stating IDDSI. And while the US doesn't do that, there are the professional organizations that have said that it's the standard of practice. And then the federal regulations support that. So for an example, the CMS regulations for quality of care, one of them specifically states that the facility must ensure residents receive treatment and care in accordance with the professional standards of practice. So that does support the use of IDDSI. And then some regulations may be specific to the environment. So long-term care can have different regulations than acute care. There might be some specific regulations that call out needing to provide care in accordance with recognized dietary practices, which again would be IDDSI as dictated by our professional organizations. So there could also be different state level requirements. So that's really important for people to consider. I am located in California, and in California, we have an additional code of regulations called Title 22. And there's many regulations in there that call out certain things related to training, education, and documentation, all surrounding standard of practice. So those regulations all support and align with the use of IDDSI. So surveyors are not going to cite failure to use IDDSI. So Luis touched on this a little bit earlier, but they're not going to ever, create a citation that says facility wasn't following IDDSI. But what they will do is that they will instead cite the outcome or the failure of not meeting the standard of care, which is IDDSI. And so because IDDSI is recognized as the standard of care, failure to use IDDSI could show that you're failing to provide the standard of practice that should be provided. So it's not necessarily like a loophole or a workaround, but it's just interpretation of the regulation. So there's no changes coming like right now currently with the regulations. These regulations have been in place and they've been standard of practice for a while, but it's because the standard of practice has changed, it's expected that you're keeping up and accommodating and adapting to these changes. So I kind of like to think of it as like the regulation or the federal requirement is the what you need to do. And IDDSI is more the how. So IDDSI teaches you how to operationalize the requirements to be able to meet those regulations. So they really go hand in hand.
I love how you put that. The what and the how, that is just beautiful. And a great perspective. The truth is, do you need it in writing that says you have to use IDDSI? No, but you just provided some excellent detail on what the federal guidelines and other auditing guidelines say that are focused on better patient care, right, and promotion of better health. And so hence you've got IDDSI for the texture modification scheme. That's great.
And that's what we're all here for, better patient care.
Yeah.
For the both of you, when surveyors walk into the kitchen or resident unit, what are they checking for when regarding IDDSI compliance, and what are the common issues that you've seen?
Sure, I'll start off on this one. So when a surveyor comes into the kitchen, they are likely to observe staff preparing texture modified foods. That's a very common checkpoint for surveyors when they enter the kitchen. So not only are they going to observe, but they're likely to ask the staff questions on how they know that the food that they're making is meeting the consistency requirements. How do they know that that's the correct texture? So that's where IDDSI is so supportive with the testing requirements, because previous frameworks didn't necessarily provide testing for staff to show proof that it was meeting the consistency that it was supposed to. So this is where staff should really be able to speak to those testing methods. It's a very easy answer. When you're questioned, how do you know, you can refer right to the testing method. So having that information available to your staff, whether it's written on the recipes or a poster in the kitchen, is very helpful, because it's nerve-wracking having a surveyor in your environment. You don't want to mess up or say the wrong thing. You can get nervous or freeze up. So even though your staff might know the information, the nerves at the time might really throw them off. So having it right there and visible for them can really, really help in those situations. So they're also likely to review your menus, your recipes. They want to make sure that what you're saying you're providing is what you are providing. And so I do know that there's been some instances where maybe the documentation will reflect use of IDDSI. So your spreadsheets might show IDDSI terminology, your recipes, etc., but the corresponding food and production and outcomes aren't aligning with the framework. So that's another area that tends to get people caught up. It is not simply about changing your terminology. You do need to make sure that operationally you're following through as well.
Those are all great points, Noel. I think another area that I know from speaking with auditors that's important is keeping your policies and procedures updated, right? So if your policies and procedures still have the old nomenclature, then of course that's a big red flag, right? So you really need to update those policies and procedures. I think the other interesting piece, and this has happened, and a bunch of people in the culinary world have shared this with us, is it has forced our chefs to actually create recipes so that, Chef A comes in and prepares mashed potatoes, and they're just the same as the way that Chef B is going to prepare them tomorrow or did yesterday. And then the testing at you know in the kitchen I think is important. And you said something very important, Noel, which is it's okay to have reference material, right? So
Mhm.
it's okay to have those posters, and all those are available at IDDSI.org, right? So to print out the posters and have them available for the team, as well as having those like in the nursing stations and in the medication rooms, et cetera, so that people can refer to the different testing methods and the descriptors for the different consistencies. So super important on that for sure.
Yeah, I think they're also something common that I hear is that they want to be sure there's practices in place for ongoing evaluation. So not only are they likely to inquire like at that time, but might inquire like how do you assess your staff moving forward? What's your regular process for testing? So how are you essentially keeping control that things are happening correctly all the time and not just at that moment? So that's really
Yeah.
important to think about as well.
Yeah, yeah. That new employee training as well. Yeah, good
Yeah.
points. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to interject a second,
Mhm.
because one thing that I think is important as our overall frame here, as we're having this great chat, which we should have had like a little glass of wine or something to sit back and talk. But is I always ask people, why IDDSI? Why are you going through this? Why are you doing this? Right? And I bring it back to why am I serving as a volunteer, right, on the board of directors as co-chair of IDDSI? And the truth is, you know, it's twofold. One for me personally is I love that we have a bigger variety of textures available to people with dysphagia, right? It's not just puree, mechanical, soft, and regular, right? So we have all these different textures. The other part that means a lot to me is that on a plate, you have different textures, right? So the person that is on, let's say, IDDSI level 6 in their foods will have items that are level 6, but they also have items that are level 5 and that are level 4, right? And so hence the pyramids. And and I think that's fantastic, right? Because those of us without dysphagia have many textures on our plates when we have a meal. So why should the person with dysphagia be sentenced to just one texture forever? Right. So that to me means so much in terms of quality of life, and especially as we see the aging population grow in numbers, right? The fastest growing age group in our country.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you for that.
I think too, in addition to why, I would also ask, why not? Because
Good.
I mean, there's enough evidence out there, showing this now. But I think what's important to remember, especially when it comes to surveyors, if you're not following the framework and you're following a different framework, then that burden is now on you to ensure that what you're doing for your staff or your residents is just as safe or comparable in the
Correct.
standard of practice as what has been established by our professional organizations. So that puts a lot of pressure on you as an operator, and a lot of burden on you to be able to explain that, when alternatively, if you align with the IDDSI framework, that's kind of provided to you naturally.
Yeah. Yep. Correct.
Yeah, thank you for that. I love the whys. So if a facility does receive a citation, what should their next steps be?
Yeah,
Plan of
if you
action.
are if you're cited, that's nowhere anyone wants to be, of course. But what happens at that point is that you don't have as much flexibility with your plan. And so that's just something to also be mindful of and get ahead of. You're now going to be on their timeline. So if you are cited, and again, you're not going to be cited directly for not using IDDSI, but you're going to be cited related to the quality of care, maybe specific food and nutrition services deficiencies, care planning issues, staff training, things like that. So you have to first identify what actually was the deficiency you are cited for, and how to directly correct that deficiency. So part of being cited is that you have to create a plan of correction. And so that plan of correction will depend on what the specific citation is. But when you do that, you also have to provide a very thorough plan and timeline back to the regulatory body that you're then required to follow. So you lose some of that flexibility that you have when you're kind of more proactive on doing this on your own timeline. And then you also need to make sure, as part of that plan of correction, that you have a plan to monitor the effectiveness of what you're doing. So not only outlining what it is that you're going to be changing operationally to correct the deficiency, but how you're going to prevent it moving forward. So all of that also is part of IDDSI implementation and comes naturally. But when you've been cited and then you're being monitored and directed and kind of under the microscope, it isn't as smooth of an experience for everyone.
Perfect. Okay, so now that we know that surveyors will be looking at best practice, meaning IDDSI being used in facilities, let's talk about implementation and training. So for a facility that hasn't formally transitioned to IDDSI, what does a practical implementation plan look like?
Oh dear. So I always say, I always say first, okay, so you're the professional at this facility. You feel all alone because you know that IDDSI is the way to go. Hopefully, in my case as a speech pathologist, I'm well connected with one of the registered dietitians who also feels that, this is the way we need to go. However, I think the first step here is figuring out who makes the decision that we need to implement IDDSI. So at the administrative level, is there a vice president? Is it the director of nursing? Who is the one that makes that decision? Because you need that administrative support for sure, right? And then you've got to, I usually think of as, forming a little steering committee, right? Who's going to be running the show, and always include the kitchen. And I think one of the things IDDSI has really done, I mean, historically, I think RDs and SLPs have talked to each other, right? And we understand that, the speech pathologist thinks texture, the dietitian thinks nutrition and absorption. And so it's always been a nice connection. But who ever thought about how things get on the plate? And so now we step into kitchens, and it's a whole different talk with the executive chef and the supervisors and the people at the front lines putting those trays together. I certainly knew nothing about that, or even, how to change textures, what happens if you cut up a protein, all that stuff. So it has started that conversation. But if you have then at least, those three groups, you have leadership from those three groups that are saying, yes, this is the way to go, then I think you continue in that direction. And I think every place has a different culture, right? You could be covering, let's say, 3 different nursing homes, and you can be involved in implementing IDDSI at those 3 places. It'll be different. I've implemented in two big hospitals in Brooklyn, New York, and it's looked different, in both places, right? And the same thing with the auditing process, because some people think we did it, we're done, and that's not the case. To me, the other challenge, once you all come together, is figuring out how do we do what we call the mapping, right? And to me, it's also, I love Excel, and I appreciate the founders and the creators of Excel, because, you take the menu, right? And then we start doing the testing, right? Which could take, depending on the menu cycles, right? It could take 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, right? And people do different things. So at some facilities, you have one designated dietitian that does all the testing, or one speech pathologist and dietitian that do all the testing, right? At one of the facilities where I was involved in implementation, we actually created 6 different teams, right, of a dietitian and a speech pathologist. And then we took a calendar and we divided, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and everybody had to take at least 3 shifts, right? And then the kitchen would have the items that were being served at that meal ready for testing, right? And then we just continued populating that spreadsheet. The one thing I would say is you want to have one volunteer that coordinates that, because that's the person that's going to go back and do some of the retesting. So you want to have at least 20% of that retesting going on to ensure that you've got some good inter-rater reliability, right? And then once that's happened, then the decision has to be made, how do we roll this out? But you're also going to find deficits, right? And this is around the world. It is not just with American food, right? Or food in the US. It's around the world. The areas where chefs usually focus more is on level 5 and level 6. We usually don't have enough of that. We have a lot of level 4, we have a lot of level 7, or many times, and this is important for whoever's doing the testing, level 5 and level 6 don't make it for one particular reason. Okay, so you have to classify it as level 7, but write down why. Right? Because maybe the chef then looks at that and says, oh, I could have just added a little broth, or I could have done this, or I could have, cut it up differently. Right? And so that then broadens that. And then somebody looks at it from the nutritional standpoint and says, now how do I create the menus for individuals? And that's a whole other overwhelming process, but not unfamiliar, because you do that already with the foods you have available, right? It's just kind of redoing it. And technically, if you think positively, and I tend to be more optimistic than pessimistic, you actually have more options now, which is great, right? So that's all possible. I think the other big piece to think about is, how are we going to do the training? Right. So usually my experience has been, you do a 1 or a 2 hour training with the dietitians and with the speech pathologists and the supervisory personnel of the kitchen. Right. And then, but for the hands-on kitchen team, maybe it's a 15-20 minute training. Right. And then more of the hands-on. Right. So that's why you want that good relationship with like the executive chef, or, that team, because they're the ones that are going to make it happen. And they're the ones that are going to call you and say, you know what, I just got a different product from our supplier, and I'm not really sure, how this is going to work out. And then suddenly, boom, you get 1 or 2 or 3 different folks that are clinicians coming in and doing testing and tasting it, and they do the testing and says, it meets the criteria, but it tastes horrible. So what are you going to do about this? And that's how you move forward. At one big hospital, we also started a newsletter, like an IDDSI update every month, right? And we did that for like the first 6 months of rollout to just eliminate that fear. Training nurses is rough. Our nurses are not going to be involved at that level, but they might be doing point of service testing. So we did, some places do some videos, some people do some hands-on, some people attend morning rounds in nursing to kind of, introduce IDDSI. And that's kind of how things happen, right? And then deciding, do we try one unit first, or do we do the whole facility? Some healthcare systems have rolled out to their 22 hospitals all at once, right? And Noel, you probably have a lot more to add to some of those implementation stories.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really important point there, that it does look different for everyone, and it can really vary by operation. So the plan itself, there's no cookie cutter plan out there that's necessarily going to meet everybody's needs. A successful implementation is going to be realistic to your operation. That is one of the most important pieces. If you start setting up unrealistic expectations, then you're setting yourself up for failure. So it might take some places a lot longer than others, and that is okay. So the important part is having a plan that works for you to support long-term success. So Luis mentioned maybe doing one area of the hospital or another area of the hospital. I think that's a great suggestion. I've also seen people implement in phases, maybe like liquids first. Liquids first are a great place to start because they're more comparable, more direct matches to what staff are used to. So that's more of a terminology and testing method training rather than training on a brand new texture. And so staff can get used to the testing, and they can get used to the terminology with fluids a little bit easier than it would be just to jump and implement things all at once. But then again, there might be some facilities that don't choose to do that and they want to implement it all at once. So really finding that sweet spot that's going to set you up for long-term success, that should be the most important piece there.
That's great. Thank you for touching on how it may look different for everyone, as I'm sure everyone on the call is at a different stage in the implementation process. So thank you for that. How should a facility approach revising menu, recipes, production sheets, and purchasing to align with IDDSI levels?
Yeah, I can touch on this one too. Luis mentioned a little bit of this in the implementation plan as well. I think that auditing your current practices is the best place to start. You might be meeting IDDSI testing requirements and aligned with the framework for some of your things without even being aware. So kind of getting your baseline of where you are and then what you need to work on is a good place to start. So I mentioned fluids, but puree too. Puree is going to be an easier place to start. Most places are already providing puree, as we've mentioned. And so the puree texture itself is more simple to accomplish. And so therefore, that's again, terminology, testing, getting familiar. I think the testing tends to be kind of a mystery to a lot of people too. And once you figure out the tests, they're so simple and quick. Something like a spoon tilt test is literally just tilting a spoon. So I think sometimes there's mystery behind the testing and how you need to audit your recipes to see. So really getting in there and breaking that down is super helpful. So you understand the tests are all things that you have available for you, forks and spoons, syringes, and they're all really quick and easy to reproduce.
And Noel, I just wanted to mention that's a great point. And there's that fear, right? So you say, okay, now I'm going to read, I'm going to read in the manual how to do the testing. But we also have videos. We have videos for every different level, right? And remember that IDDSI has a YouTube channel. Now you can easily go into IDDSI.org. You hit videos and you're going to find the videos for all these different textures, the different testing methods. We've also got a layout for, you want to test something for this level. These are some of the testing methods you could try because, it might be more than just one testing method for a texture. So it's really easy, right? It's intimidating because it's different. Right.
Right.
But it's and there aren't that many testing methods, right? There's a spoon tilt and there's the fork pressure and et cetera, the fork drip. So the truth is once you learn all 5 or 6 of the different methods is just knowing when to use them and how to then ensure that you've done that you've reached the level that you wanted.
Right.
So yeah. And you're not
Yeah.
alone. I always say this to my master's level students. Others have done this before, right? So you can do it also. And the truth is, right now, we have over 64 different countries that have implemented or are in the process of implementing IDDSI at their different facilities. So millions of people have been involved in implementing IDDSI, which means you can also do it.
Absolutely. And just to add, for really strong IDDSI training, you do need to require that the staff are hands-on. So watching the videos is very helpful to break down some of that fear, but actually having them do the tests in front of you, touching the food themselves, feeling the food, getting really involved with the textures, that's going to also break down a lot of that fear. And then making sure that that training sticks. So this is not a one and done situation. You don't have them show you once and move on. This needs to be an ongoing process. You should have it documented, like when you assess competency, how often you reassess competency. And then a really important piece too is building this into your onboarding. So not only for your dietary staff getting trained and onboarding, but like Luis mentioned, even nursing, maybe nursing was trained on some of the terminology or testing methods during implementation, but how are new nurses brought in informed of this? So it really does need to be multidisciplinary and ongoing.
Yeah, thank you for that. I discovered the YouTube videos and I love them. They are great.
They are, yeah.
And
Yeah.
there are some created by IDDSI, but a lot created by others. So do take a look and see what
Mhm.
we have more and more chefs getting involved also in talking about IDDSI and creating videos about IDDSI. And we're starting to see more discussion and narrative around the texture modification details, right? That clinicians may not know how to soften something up or how to chop something up and still make it look appealing. That's the chef's world, right? And so they're starting to share more and more. We have many reference groups around the world have chefs as members of the IDDSI reference groups. And so we're seeing a lot more of that talk, which is great. And we'll be facilitating that in the not too distant future for folks as well.
Awesome. Um, from your going kind of with our resources here. So from your experience, Louise, what resource is most valuable for teams that are just beginning the IDDSI transition?
What resources are most valuable? Well, I would say, first of all, you go to the IDDSI website, right? You download the descriptors and the testing methods. Also take a look at a few of the videos because that will help. We also have several, IDDSI 101 kind of videos. And there are webinars that are free to go and watch, several that have been created and recorded by the United States IDDSI reference group on implementation, on the nuts and bolts of bringing IDDSI to the table. Um, and there are a few others. Actually, now for 2026, there's a whole program of webinars that will be available and that are being created and recorded by the United States IDDSI reference group. So be on the lookout for that. Also important to sign up for the eBite newsletter on the IDDSI website. That is a monthly newsletter, and that has all the latest information. And so it's important to stay in touch. Do also, if you're in the United States, you go to the United States IDDSI reference group site. So if you go into our website, you see across the world, you click on that, you're going to see a menu, click on United States. There are so many materials available there by the US IRG, and Noel chairs one of the US IRG committees, so she knows. But really, the US IRG IDDSI reference group has done a great job and has created lots of materials, patient handouts, videos, even little training videos for, food service personnel versus some of the professionals or clinicians, etc. So play around, go in and look. Don't be totally intimidated. And, worst case scenario, if you feel you're alone, you probably aren't. But you also there can email the United States IDDSI reference group any questions, and someone will answer you or reach out to you to touch base and walk you through some things.
That's great. Seems like there's something for everybody on the IDDSI website there. Noel, can you touch on how digital tools and operational software can support IDDSI compliance day to day?
Yeah. So see if your software has solutions for you. I know of one if you need one. But many softwares out there on the market might have IDDSI solutions. So they might have, recipes that have been tested for IDDSI, menus that are IDDSI friendly, spread for the different textures. So that can often be a big barrier for people getting started because they're just not quite sure what they should even be serving. So having some of that information provided to you can be a big time saver and just really help with your confidence moving forward. And then see what other kind of support they could provide you as well. Many softwares have solutions in them where they can align with the colors of the IDDSI codes, the tags and the level numbers can print out on the tickets, so little cues for staff. I know some softwares can print the testing methods along with the recipes, so that's another great solution for people. So if you are not aware of what your software can do to support ITSE, definitely reach out because often there are great solutions that can be helpful to you.
That's great.
Yeah.
So for both of you, if you could offer one piece of advice to leaders preparing for survey, what would it be?
So before we answer that, I just want to mention, because we were talking about fear, et cetera, and I really don't like gossip. And so there's this gossip going on around about what's this ITSE Academy thing happening. I just thought it was important that the audience knows that at the ITSE global level, yes, we have run 3 pilots now of what we'll be calling our ITSE Academy. And it will be a way it's still taking shape, so it's still in the very elementary stages, but it will be a way to then certify folks on the ITSE testing methods, right, and the descriptors. So that will be coming out in the not too distant future. And then again, with implementation, decisions can be made. Will the leaders at your facility be ITSE certified and then train others? Or will a facility decide everybody has to go through the training, through the ITSE Academy? Again, there will be no prescription. It will just be available for everyone that is interested and in need. So I did want to mention that. So Noel, that means you had a chance to think about your advice. So while I think about my advice, why don't you go ahead and share yours?
Okay. I'm really excited for IDDSI Academy too. I've been looking forward to that. I think that will be really helpful for people. Okay, so a piece of advice for leaders. I think my biggest piece of advice is making sure your staff feel really comfortable and supported. So this is a big operational change for your kitchen staff. It's also very risky. Swallowing difficulties can be life or death. And so this is important business that they're responsible for. So you really want to equip them with the information they need, the tools and resources they need. So earlier, how I mentioned having those resources available, posted in your kitchen, making sure, do they have the right equipment to create these textures that they're responsible for creating? Do they have the equipment for testing them? So really breaking that stuff down and making sure that they feel comfortable, having conversations with them, similar to how a surveyor would. You don't want a surveyor to be the first person to ask your staff member how they know to create the texture correctly. That should be something that you're asking them frequently as part of your regular audits and ongoing demonstrations of quality improvement. So I think that's the most important thing, because if you do get buy-in and comfortability from your staff, that's going to make things a lot smoother for you in the long run.
Wow, that was great. Now, how do I top that? So I'm going to go more to the personal level. I think there are a lot of colleagues out there that feel like, oh, this is being imposed on me. And it's like, oh, I'm going to have to do this. And the truth is, we're here to serve a population. Right? So you've chosen to be a dietitian for a reason. You've chosen to be a speech pathologist for a reason. You've chosen to be a chef in an institution or a food service worker in an institution, which means you're providing a service to real people, right? To people that could be your family, could be your loved ones. And so why would you not want to provide the best to these people? Right. And so rather than thinking, oh, I got to do this, right? This is being imposed on me. Turn that around. Turn that around into what a great opportunity to provide something better, right, to the people that I serve. And if you do that, your team will sense that as well. Right? It's like, this is great. We're doing this. Look how much fun the flow test is, right? We got the IDDSI funnels in the shipment, in the mail this morning. Let's go test them out, right? There you go. Thank you very much, Noel.
I do keep one around.
I should have one out of my pocket, but I don't. So I think that's an important piece, right? Because we work so hard to help people, but we need to help ourselves, and sometimes it means checking that attitude. because this could be fun. There are things that you'll be testing that you never thought you would be testing, right? So so have fun with it. Life is very short, and we're here because we want to provide the best service to our patients. So go forward.
Thank you. Thanks. I love both of those answers so much. We'll be sharing the AminoSuite IDDSI Transition Toolkit tomorrow to everyone on the call. But as a sneak peek, what features in this toolkit do you feel will be most helpful to leaders?
Yeah, I think I'm really excited about the toolkit because I think there's so much information out there about IDDSI. Like we mentioned, the website has so many things, but this is a global initiative, as we've mentioned. And so sometimes there's so much information on there that it can be confusing necessarily finding what's relevant to you, your practice, your location. So our toolkit kind of pulls everything together for US operators, what's relevant to them. So it has links to all the resources on the IDDSI website that can be helpful to you, including the videos of the testing methods, audit sheets, timelines, all of that information. So I think just having it all in one place for easy access will be super beneficial for people.
Well, thanks so much for a great discussion. I cannot believe it, but we do not have any questions in the chat. So it must mean that you guys covered it all.
Hopefully it's not that they fell asleep.
Yes, hopefully not. It's too exciting to fall asleep to.
There you go.
Before we wrap up, we do have an exciting announcement to make. We are giving away free IDDSI readiness audit calls with Noel herself to 5 lucky attendees. So this will be a 1-hour personalized call where we will review your team's IDDSI progress, get guidance from Noel, and learn how to position yourself for survey success. So we will be randomly selecting 5 winners, and if you're selected, you'll be notified in an email in the coming days. To everyone that joined, you should keep an eye out in your email for the Ultimate IDDSI Transition Toolkit that we just discussed. It will be coming your way tomorrow. But that concludes our webinar today. So we sincerely hope that the information shared helps you feel confident in your steps towards IDDSI compliance. Thank you again, Noel and Louise, for sharing your valuable knowledge, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.